In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic once again highlighted a lot of inequities that our systems and hardships suffered more acutely by Black women. In analyzing the COVID crisis and the resulting economic fallout, Janelle Jones of the Groundwork Collaborative developed a concept called Black Women Best that posits if Black women are thriving in our economy, then it must be working for everyone. If we improve outcomes for those suffering the most, then all of us stand to gain. As the United States looks to rebuild from the pandemic, and with Kamala Harris, the nation's first woman and first Black woman to serve as vice president, we have an unprecedented opportunity to center Black women in our national conversation around health, education, economic well-being, and create a more equitable society. I am thrilled about the panel we've convened tonight for this discussion, and I thank you for joining us. Chicago State Foundation hosts conversations like this free of charge for the benefit of the community. If you find value in the programming tonight, I encourage you to visit www.csu.edu/donate and make a financial contribution to support our amazing student scholars and the mission of the foundation. I'll give that to you again. That's www.csu.edu/donate. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring to the virtual stage Chicago State University's President Z. Scott. Under President Scott's leadership, Chicago State University has a renewed focus on growing student enrollment, building the school's reputation for scholarship and academic research, and increasing alumni and community engagement. As a distinguished business and civic leader, she has played a significant role in the Chicago community for more than 30 years. Currently, she serves on the board of directors for the Ann and Robert Lurie Children's Hospital Medical Center and Just the Beginning, an organization devoted to improving the diverse pipeline in the legal field. President Scott has also recently appointed co-chair of the Illinois Board of Higher Education Strategic Planning Advisory Committee. Previously, President Scott spent more than 16 years as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Illinois, where she served as chief of the General Crime Section. So with that, I welcome our President Scott.
Thank you, Angelique, for that generous introduction, and welcome everyone. I am delighted that you have joined us this evening, and I would promise this to be an engaging and important conversation among women. I want to thank our hosts, the Chicago State Foundation, for their work on today's event and for their invaluable service and partnership with Chicago State University. I also want to welcome and thank tonight's speakers who will be joining us. I'd like to name them and their titles and their organizations. Felicia S. Davis, Chicago Foundation for Women's President and CEO. Cherita Ellens, the CEO of Women Employed. Tammy Gibson, Honoring the Legacy, a Guide of African-American Monuments and Statues. And Kimberly Loftis, Blue Marble Payroll, where she serves as CFO and COO. And finally, I want to thank and welcome all of you for joining this remotely but important discussion. Born into slavery in 1852, Anna Julia Cooper would go on to write these prophetic words: "Only the Black woman can say when and where I enter in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, without violence and without suing or special patronage. Then and there, the whole Negro race enters with me." According to the Center for American Women in Politics, Cooper's book, A Voice from the South by Black Women of the South, published in 1892, broke ground as the first book-length volume of Black feminist analysis in the United States. An author, an educator, and activist, Anna Julia Cooper would go on to be recognized as one of the foremost scholars of her time. Not only did her work give voice to the many struggles faced by African Americans during the late 19th century, it still speaks loudly to the contemporary issues of racial injustice and gender inequality that demand our full attention as a society. The crushing impact of racism and how it shows up in the lives of Black women informed some of the work and research of Chicago State University, It also informs the university's steadfast focus on equity every day. Chicago State University, as some of you know, is proud to serve as Illinois' only U.S. Department of Education 4-year designated predominantly Black institution. Our students come from diverse backgrounds, but all enter Chicago State with a desire to succeed and be successful. Like Anna Julia Cooper believed, we know that education remains the most assured path for Black women's economic mobility. And a degree from Chicago State University has proven value. According to a New York Times featured study conducted by Harvard economist Raj Chetty, Chicago State University ranks in the top 4% nationwide among all colleges and universities for providing economic mobility for our graduates. As the country continues to grapple with COVID-19, we must not lose sight of the pronounced effect that the pandemic has had on Black women, particularly in the city that has seen its first Black mayor, a county that has elected its first Black female president, a state that has elected its first Black female lieutenant governor. We welcome each of you tonight as partners in engaging in the much needed mission-driven work of Chicago State. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to this evening's conversation. It is now my pleasure to turn the evening over to Christina Steed, Vice President of the Board of the Chicago State Foundation and Executive President of Flowers Communications Group, who will moderate tonight's conversation. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, President Scott, and thank you, Chair David, for that great introduction. I am so honored and excited to have this conversation. We have had an exciting, interesting start to the new year, and I think that this is a very appointed time to have a conversation. So, welcome to a new benchmark for American progress centering Black women. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists so we can get this conversation going. Our first panelist is Felicia S. Davis, President and CEO of Chicago Foundation for Women. Felicia is a lifelong Chicagoan and self-described girl from the South Side. She is deeply committed to community through inclusive service to others. As president and CEO of Chicago Foundation for Women, she leads their strategic efforts in investing in women and girls as catalysts, fighting for gender equity, and building stronger communities for all. Since its founding in 1985, Chicago Foundation for Women has invested more than $39 million in organizations supporting women and girls across the Chicago region. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Felicia. Our next panelist is Sharita Ellens. Sharita Ellens is the CEO of Women Employed. She is a native Chicagoan and longtime advocate for Chicago women, youth, and families. As CEO of Women Employed, Sharita leads an organization that for the past 4 decades has been dedicated to establishing equity for women in the workforce. Before joining Women Employed, Sharita led business operations and communications as the Executive Vice President for Skills for Chicagoland's Future, a public-private partnership that works to close the access gap by matching businesses that have unmet hiring needs with qualified, unemployed, and underemployed job seekers. Sharita holds an executive MBA from the University of Notre Dame and a Bachelor of Science degree in speech communication from Illinois State University. Welcome so much. Our next panelist is Kimberly Loftis. Kimberly has over 20 years of experience helping organizations shape and improve their strategy and bottom line. She is a skills strategist, CPA, facilitator, and business consultant. Kimberly's experience and credentials enable her to discover and execute business solutions that improve profits and work processes. She is able to turn around stagnant companies as well as assist companies experiencing rapid growth through strategic planning and financial know-how. She helps companies to be poised for finance and strategic success. Kimberly is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer of Blue Marble Payroll. Welcome, Kimberly. And then finally, we have our Chicago State grad, Tammy Gibson. Tammy is an entrepreneur, historian, traveler, and educational speaker. Her mission is to raise awareness, impact the youth, and preserve pride in African American culture through her personal journey. Raised by entrepreneurial parents, they modeled the importance of hard work and instilled the significance of education as the vehicle to transport her to the life of her dreams. Tammy earned her BA in African American Studies from Chicago State University. Her teachings of African American history through her travels, storytelling, and collection of primitive artifacts have inspired adults and the youth to learn, understand the importance of events and people of the African diaspora. Her motto is Black History is More Than 28 Days. Welcome, Tammy. Well, I have a great panel tonight, and we are going to have a great discussion. Again, audience, you are at a benchmark for American progress centering Black women. So as Chair David mentioned, really the genesis of this conversation was sparked from the groundbreaking work that Janelle Jones has done at the Groundwork Collaborative in her proposal around this economic worldview of Black women best, which posits that when the outcomes for Black women improve, everyone else will benefit, particularly now as the nation thinks about rebuilding from the fallout of COVID-19. So for a lot of us who work in this space, who work with, who are targeting multicultural audiences, working with Black and Brown women, this is not new in a sense, right? But it is gaining more steam and is gaining more visibility. Janelle was recently appointed chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor under the Biden administration. So we're, hopeful to see this come to life from a policy standpoint and get more elevation there. But what we know, and what a lot of this report talks about, that she and her co-authors came to, is our economy was built in large part on Black women's diminished power through unpaid, exploited, and forced labor. Black women's labor is central to the functioning of our economy, not just in a time of crisis. And we see this with the majority of Black women being frontline workers and essential workers. The impact of the unemployment numbers over-indexing and really having an impact on Black women. And so, I think the first question I kind of want to open up with is, when we think about policy and how policy could be impacted by using this Black woman's best strategy, what would that look like? What would that look like? And Sharita, I want to kind of start with you and get your perspective there.
That's interesting. I'm glad we're starting with policy, because obviously we know that policy is not the end all be all. However, policy is the quickest way to make the biggest impact for the most people. And we also know that policy has traditionally not centered anyone but white men. And so, to have an opportunity to have multiple voices at the table, not just Janelle, but multiple voices at the table that will bring the lived experiences of Black women and other women of color are key. So when we began to look at what this economic recovery look like when we come out of COVID, we will have people at the table that will be pushing policies that will impact women, because we know that the recovery has to center women, because women were the ones, and primarily Black and Brown women are the ones that are most impacted by this. So we would have to be looking at, when we look at economic recovery coming from COVID, things like paid leave for all, things like eliminating the sub-minimum wage, which we still have a large group of people that are impacted by slave wages. And the majority of those people that receive sub-minimum wages are Black women. And so when we think about right now, where the Biden administration is talking about raising the minimum wage for everyone, part of that conversation is also about eliminating the sub-minimum wage. We will be having conversations about what does the child care infrastructure look like, and what does it need to look like, and not just big child care providers, but home providers, direct cash payments so that you could care for your children, and not just for young children, but making sure that families are being provided support to care for older children as well. What does it look like to pump money into the education system so that we're getting vaccines out to teachers and schools so schools can open back up, and schools are being given money, right? So that they have enough PPE, so that they can fix their ventilation system, so that they can safely come back in the building, so that kids can go back to work, go back to school, so parents can go back to work. And so there are a multitude, and I can keep going on, and I won't do that, so everybody has an opportunity to jump in here. But I do think that there are a multitude of policies that we can look at. And also, one more thing, when we look at about flexible workplaces, flexible schedules, it's not flexible schedules that are convenient for the employer, right? It is about creating an environment where people can define what their workday looks like based off of what their needs are, how they need to care for their family. So it's looking at all of those things. So policy, employer practice, as well as economic stimulation.
Yeah, Felicia, did you want to kind of add on to that point in terms of the perspective of policy and, you know, equity in general?
I think the only thing that I would add would be around aging parents. So as many women and Black women are leaving the workforce to care for young children, many women in my age bracket and older are leaving to care for their parents. And so the other missing link to this, adding to what Sharita has just said, is providing provisions for that. And it's really a shame, because when I think about Vice President Harris, in her 50s, right? One, she found love in her 50s, so that's a whole nother conversation. But also that too often in the corporate sector, there's a double whammy that when a woman reaches 50, she's kind of, you know, people start to see her on a decline from a productivity and a contribution standpoint. And arguably, we have Vice President Harris at 56 in the second highest office in the land. And I hope that that gives people another look at what that means for the workforce, for women who are over 50, and the contributions. I mean, arguably, she's at the peak of her career right now and has so much more to contribute. And so I think those things as well, looking at ageist policies and also the inclusion of caregiving that is really the full spectrum, including, you know, the early childhood spectrum that Cherita just talked about, but also what happens later in life with aging parents and or quite frankly, a sick partner, you know, because that also happens to a great extent as well.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add one more thing to that?
Please.
Because Felicia added that on there. And so it's, you know, when we think about policy, it's being even more creative. So how do we look at the way we save, right? You know, so we have retirement savings. We can put away for tuition for our children. What does it look like for us to be able to save, because we know that we're going to be taking care of our parents, and they probably weren't in a position to save for that themselves. So it's really being creative when we're looking at policy and really taking the experiences of these populations and what our life really looks like and what our barriers are, and creating those solutions.
No, I think, Sharita, thank you for jumping in, because that kind of tees up Kimberly to you to kind of talk about it from the economic standpoint, and, you know, how important, you know, pay equity, savings, creating a strong business and a legacy of a business that will help to support that woman, because we see Black women are one of the fastest growing segments that are becoming entrepreneurs because they're hitting a glass ceiling, or, you know, talking about the ageist, you know, situation. I'm in an industry where over 40, it's like, see you later, you can't be creative anymore. And I have a podcast that talks about that. So Kimberly, if you kind of wanted to weigh in from that perspective. You're on mute.
Thank you. Sharita originally mentioned that, you know, policy can only go that far, only goes so far. And I agree with that. There's certain things that policy will be able to help define, but I also think we have a lot more power than we give ourselves. For example, in the equity space, as far as getting the same compensation as your peers as a Black woman, if you're in a private company versus a corporate company, there's different approaches you have to take, but you have to build that network. Not sometimes we just bring our network only consists of people that looks like us. We also need to branch out and make sure that we have those white males who are executives, who are your peers, that you also build a relationship with, because they have knowledge that never gets to us unless they share it. So for example, a lot of times we have those compensation conversations, there's business reasons why they don't want to give you that extra income, but there's usually workaround solutions that people in the know about, but people in our community don't know because we haven't been plugged into that network. So I think we need to do a lot more work on making sure that we get that shared knowledge base. And then once we get that, we bring it back to our community to say, hey, this is how you get that compensation in a non-confrontational way. For example, some companies don't want to give you your base compensation. There's bonuses, one-time bonuses. There's other ways, there's vehicle allowances. So for a company, doesn't really hurt them from a compensation standpoint. So there's different things you can do to make sure that you get that equity. And we need to be more, I think, proactive in that space. As far as, I think we need to be strategic in the companies that we join, because certain companies are never going to change. Even with policy, they're going to be very resistant to giving what you need as for your family's needs. And you need to take that into account when you're interviewing and deciding where you're going to work. Is your company generous as far as time off, or is that company family oriented? Because there's companies that I know today I could never work for. I like them, I like their product or their services, but they just don't fit with what I'm trying to do in my life at this time with my family. And it's just not, I will never be successful with that family. My family obligation with their requirement. So I think it's being conscious of being strategic of how we build those relationships, as well as what career choices we make. But you don't have to sacrifice your economics for your career. It's just finding the company that best fits where you are in your life.
That's a great point. And I'm going to stick with you because we had an announcement this week in terms of Black women joining the C-suite, becoming the CEO of Walgreens. Not since Ursula Burns have we had a Fortune 500 Black woman CEO. And so looking at that example and how she will hopefully, be charting a different example to, widen the aperture in terms of opportunities for Black women in the C-suite and centering Black women at such a high level so that there are opportunities created for other Black women at other companies. Can you speak to kind of like, Black women in the C-suite and how that centering them there even has an impact?
I say it has an impact, but it's very difficult, from personal experience. It's very difficult in those types of roles because you have such a light shining on you. Her whole past, she had probably had a beam of light shine on her, questioning every move that she made. Because that you are different than everyone else who's traditionally had that role. And it's really important to have that support network and be able to filter what other people are saying to you to see if they're really trying to assist you, or they really just have their own unconscious bias. But you have to have that filter mechanism, else you can't survive in that C-suite. And then also have that support group that you can bounce that off of and say, am I crazy? Or is this, for real? This real stuff to help me move forward. And that's something that she probably had to battle her entire career to get to where she's at. And then also, once you have that power, you need to use it. Like because of my network, I can find qualified people that people say they can't find that look like us. They're out there, but because they're not networking with people in those communities, they don't find those people and they don't put in the effort in those different channels to find those people. But we know how to find those people. And so when you get into that C-suite, I think it's very important to bring along people who look like you, maybe fit the slot perfectly, but can be developed, because again, we always have to arrive already fully developed for that role, versus people who do not look like us can be developed into that. We need to also do that for our own people. Sometimes we want to make that perfect Black candidate. Why can't they just be 99% there and we can get them the other 1% way? But also to recognize the fact that if you're in that C-suite, everything you do is a reflection of you, but you also want to support that person. Just because you bring them in, just don't bring them in and just leave them. Help develop them so that when they are developing and getting further in their career, they can bring people along with them as well. So I think that's really the key to expand people who look like us. Because, our friends look like us, but nobody knows they exist until we bring them along.
Christina, yes, please. I wanted to add something to that as well, because the data shows often by the time an organization, and I'm not saying this of Walgreens Boots Alliance, but often by the time an organization brings in a Black woman as the leader of that organization, it's in trouble. And so while it has challenges, and I want to make sure, or we, she would want to make sure, we make sure that the opportunities to actually turn around, that the ramp for that is actually quite long, and that by the time, how much time did it take to get into that place, that she is actually afforded the opportunity to actually turn that around. And too often what happens is, it's, white male CEO or white male leader after white male leader after white male leader. And then it's like, oh man, let's do something different, or we're in trouble, and they bring in a Black woman. And the problem with that is that those men maybe collectively have had, I don't know, 10 years, 12 years, whatever the case may be, or even their tenures or longer. And the expectation is that you're going to come in. I know we got Black girl magic, but some things take time,
Right.
and you need the resources, and she needs the support, and including with the board of directors and so forth. And so that's not just for this situation, but generally speaking, when you go into those organizations, when boards of directors are making those hires, and Sharita and I have talked about this before, so even in philanthropy and other places, when boards of directors are making that those hires and they want to go into that direction, that leader needs to have the support there, not just, the one or two perhaps board members who are people of color, but the entire board. She needs to have cover, she needs to have time, and she needs to have the same resources that those who have come before her have had access to, and or more. So I did want to make that point, because sometimes it's like, because then what will happen is, oh, you didn't turn it around in a year. Okay, we tried to have a Black woman leader and we did that, check it off our list, and then go back to the status quo.
That's usually what, you're absolutely right. That's usually what happens is, and then the nitpickiness of the smallest things, that if it was someone else, it wouldn't matter. But I think given her experience, not using hers, I don't know her personally, but given by the time somebody's reached that, they've already had that experience, they kind of know that that's what they're walking into. It's not like a surprise that they might not have the full support of the board or full support of their, their team. It's just something that they know, and it's unfortunate, but it's real. It is.
Yes, I agree, because every time when something like this happens, they bring a Black woman in, and we're supposed to have the S on our chest and, make everything happen like that, and puts Black women in a situation, like you said, that if she fails, it's like you try to get her in a position and she couldn't fulfill that task.
Right.
Yeah, so Tammy, thanks for jumping in. I'm actually going to turn it back to you, because as we think about the history that informs this thinking around centering Black women, and why it is really the time to, it is kind of past the time to do it, but we are in a position where people are more receptive. There's people are listening, given last year's kind of social justice movement, the standing up of diversity, equity, and inclusion, chief diversity officers, programming, et cetera. There's more attention being paid to it, but a lot of people don't know the history of how Black women's labor is the foundation for this country. And so I would love for you to kind of talk about it from a historical perspective.
Yes, absolutely. With me being a travel historian, my main focus is to locate historical sites that talk about women, mainly on plantations. And when you think of his story, it's his story, and sometimes her story is overlooked. And when I go to historical sites, mainly plantations, the women are completely erased. And it's my job to make these historical places and plantations be accountable. Because when I walk on the grounds of these plantations, I see two worlds, a world of the enslaved woman and the world of the slave owner. And they were the majority on these plantations, where there were midwives, wet nurses, seamstresses, cooks. I mean, there were the majority on these plantations that, that these people in the big house benefit from, and provided economic wealth, not only to the slave owners, but to America as well. And when I go to these places and I hear tour guides say, enslaved women were treated well, and that offends me as an African-American woman, as far as what do you mean by that? And when they say, the enslaved women, we didn't separate the families, which meant the mother and the children. They sold the husband or father. So in my mind, that's what they think as far as a family. And when I hear that, I automatically think about the Diane Carroll movie, of where she was a mother that had all these children and she had to hire a boyfriend, so that offends me a lot. So what I've been doing for the past couple of years is highlighting these places, talk to these places, these historical sites. And it got to a point where I became an interpreter and storyteller on these sites, because no one is telling these stories because they want to make a certain group, white people, feel comfortable. They don't want to hear about slavery, but they want to know about the big house. They want the Gone with the Wind, mint julep, hoop skirts version of these sites. But I think of Sankofa, in order to have a future, we have to know our past. So we have to know our enslaved ancestors who showed us that we walk on today. And so when I do my storytelling on these sites, you know, when I put on my period piece, it's my job and responsibility as a Black woman to go on these sites and doing my historical research, reading slave narratives of these women that talked about, you know, being in bondage and sleeping in slave quarters, where these enslaved women, either they slept in the slave quarters or they slept in the kitchen, or sleep at the foot of the bed of a slave owner and his wife, just to honor these women whose voices are not being heard at these plantation sites because they want to make a certain group of people feel uncomfortable. And when I do the job, you know, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. If that's the case, then I'm not going to work on a particular site, because I feel like it's my duty to talk about these enslaved women that historical is already not in the history books, but they're also doing it at these historical sites as well.
And I think it's helpful that we all know we all know this history, right? Because I think that for me, the social justice movement gave me an opportunity to do some reading, get myself smart around my own history, and just to understand how Black women not having wealth and Black families not having wealth is not an aberration. Like it is literally systemic systems that have been stood up within the country that continue and persist to this day, that women are trying to, you know, unravel from and you know, ascend. So I would love either Sharita or Felicia, or, you know, any panelists to kind of talk about the recent statistics around the female recession and how it not just affects the individual woman and Black women in particular, but it affects the entire either Black community, Black family, Black cousins, play cousins. Like it affects our whole kind of sphere of influence when we are impacted by our recession and our unemployment numbers, which are typically higher than the general market. So I posit that question to anyone.
This is Kimberly. I will start the conversation around that. I believe that everybody needs to have a side hustle or a plan B. Because a lot of times I know I was personally raised as a kid to get a job. And, you know, you go to college, you come out of college and get a job, and that I was on that track. And then at some point in my career, I was like, hold up, you know, everybody around me is making the money. And, you know, I get a decent salary, have a decent life, but to really have that freedom that I would like for my family to, you know, when I have a child and as she grows up, I don't want her living check to check, to have that freedom where we have some inheritance to pass on. I need to have my own plan B. And so I actually, you know, left corporate America for a while and have my own consulting practice. But it's basically doing those types of things, you know, that, you know, fits your personality, fits your goals and your drives, but you're not dependent on someone else to give you that economic stability. So I think it kind of starts there, to quit thinking about, oh, we have to have someone have a job available. I mean, there's a place for that, but also what can we do for ourselves individually to take off some of that stress and be in control of our own destiny.
I'm going to add on to that. I think I could go so many different directions after that particular statement, because I think that for some women, that is an option.
Right.
For many Black women, that is not an option, because the access to that opportunity and the pathway to that opportunity does not yet exist. So even when we look at, you know, the increased number of women of color, the increased number of Black women that are starting their own businesses, their access to capital is minute compared to what others have. So yes, you can start with your own stuff, but when you're starting from a deficit, that makes that a bit difficult. And just to, you know, to ground us a little bit on the magnitude of what this pandemic is doing for women in 2020, women lost more than 5 million jobs, period, right? 42% of them were women of color. We also know, and then so when we start making like the connections, I posted on Facebook earlier today, in Illinois, 84% of Black mothers are either primary or sole breadwinners. So when you start connecting the dots of women that are unemployed, women that had to reduce their hours because of childcare, or because their industry was furloughed, or because they are due to occupational segregation and years and years of systemic racism and sexism, they're in those roles that were heavily impacted by the pandemic. You can easily make the connection between what happens when women, and in this case in particular, Black women, do not have the economic power that they need to sustain themselves, their families, and their communities. They don't have the economic power to have the agency to make the choices that they need to be able to live in the communities that they need to live in to be safe, to be able to send their kids to school so that their kids' outcomes will be different than theirs, so that they're not dependent on sending their child to the school that's in the neighborhood that's probably subpar, so that they don't have to stay in domestic situations where they are not safe because they lack the basic economic security to remove themselves and their families from certain situations. So I wholeheartedly agree that we have to devise solutions that will allow women to gain more economic power and not be dependent just on income, which is why when you talk about pay equity, it can't just be about income. When you talk about wealth, it can't just be about income. It has to be about an accumulation of wealth building tools, which of course is some of those other things. And there's so many things that are out there that our people don't even know exist because there's a void of information, right? Because we don't know that, just like you said, we don't know the information. And so, we're not bringing it back to our communities. And when we start bringing it back to our communities and they let us know and they know that we have this information, now all of a sudden these resources are drying up. And or they're creating, such as Invest Southwest Chicago, they create these initiatives and they don't build in mechanisms to ensure that those that should have more access to it, that have equitable access to it, actually are the ones that are getting the opportunities. And it's not just going to the ones that are kind of plugged in. I'm going to pause right there because I could keep going.
Okay, so I just want to say that I'm torn a little bit about what you said because, be a little bit personal. We were 3 stepladder kids, meaning my mom had kid after kid after kid, lived in the projects, on food stamps. But this woman went, 3 different fathers, basically went to school at night to become an RN. And eventually when we went on the way to college, she became an RN. So, there's some things we have to say. Yes, we want to help everybody, but there are women who are struggling that do have the drive to do what they need to do to get up the economic ladder. And so, so I don't, and I also, I know this is not a favorite thing to say, but I think a lot of times we rely on the minimum wage. So what happens? We raise the minimum wage, but those people they don't have additional training. It's just like we keep raising the minimum wage. We're not solving the issue where they can have jobs that gets them beyond whatever the minimum wage is. It's only a short-time solution that I can pay my bills, I can pay my rent, but I'm not able to do anything special for my kids. I'm not able to get out of my, average housing environment into a better schools. But it's a combination of things, but it can't be just policy or someone helping us with policy. It has to be that development and training so I can have a skill set that lifts up my whole family. Because a lot of times in our Black community, we're not only lifting up ourselves and our own kids, but our grandparents, our parents, our cousins. And so we need all of that to get us to the next level. But it can't be that we have to take the responsibility for everyone. It has to be here's the opportunity to get development and that career path to help you, but you have to put in the time to do that, and we'll give you the access to build those relationships. But but it's not only the individual women, but it's also us acting as a community.
No, you're absolutely right. And also understanding that there are even barriers to be able to access those pathways. And, and we also have to be understanding of, look, yes, I'm first generation college graduate myself, but just because we made it doesn't mean that everybody else has the same, right? So we still have to ensure that we are building equitable pathways and making sure that we are getting information out there about the resources that are available, and hell, that we are holding their hand and bringing them through if we have to, because we cannot sit back and say, I made it, you need to do your part. Right. Yes, they need to do their part, but we have to help them. Like, we can't just, we can't just be like, whatever, they got to do X, Y, and Z. We have to do our part to lift up, not just send the elevator back.
Yeah. So I think it's really important, because I know sometimes in corporate America, people are scared to be seen together. Oh my God, the Black people are together.
Yeah.
And so they're scared of that politics. But I would say it's really important to, bring in people so they have they have the opportunity and the access. I definitely agree with you there.
So
Felicia,
I'm trying to get in, because they are.
It's double Dutch. It's double Dutch.
It's like woo, woo, woo. So I wanted to also pull it back a little bit and think about like the structural nature of it and what we're really fighting against, because the reality is a lot of other folks had head start, and it doesn't matter how much individual person, my drive, the passion that my mother instilled in me, and education, and really pushing me. It's also about the structural things that still exist. So first of all, there is still a huge wealth gap, and we have the income inequality and the wealth gap. So in this country, Black or white non-Hispanic family has on average about $170,000 worth of wealth, a Hispanic family about $20,000 worth of wealth, and a Black family about $17,000 worth of wealth. And that varies regionally. It varies also by who's head of household. Sharita offered the statistics earlier about the number of households in Illinois, for example, that are led by single women. But let's go back to like this false premise and like how this all starts, because one of the best policies that I want to see done in this administration is student debt loan relief. So there is this in the Black community, and every Black mama told their Black daughters this, because my mama told me this: you have to do what? You have to, get this education. You have to work twice as hard. You have to do this. So consequently, you have Black women carrying the overwhelming burden of student loan debt in this country. And so we have to provide some relief for that. And the promise was, if you go and get all of these degrees, if you do all of this stuff, then these doors will open up for you. But guess what? Those doors did not open up. And actually, when you did get in the door, you were paid pennies on the dollar to what the men were being paid of every race. You were being paid pennies on the dollar, which exacerbates the fact that when COVID, so let's fast forward, when something like COVID hit, your ability, a Black family, a Black woman leading a family's ability to withstand the economic pressures that have been created because of COVID goes back to the earlier premise. How much student loan debt am I carrying? What am I actually being paid? What is my, how much wealth have I been able to accumulate? And let's be clear, I was on vacation sometime this summer, I won't say where, and we were on this tour, and the people were talking about, oh yeah, they were giving free land to people to come and like settle in this place. This is in, close by. I was in driving distance. And who didn't get free land of any kind? And so the reality, that land that they were talking about is now valued at millions of dollars because there are lots of lakes and it's valuable. And so let's also acknowledge the fact that this Head Start was severe. I mean, it provided a severe limitation. And so, and the other thing, when Tammy, I wanted to say this too, because Tammy was talking about basically like the erasure of narrative of Black women. We don't have to go, there's plenty of that in slavery, but we do not have to go back that far to see this erasure of narrative of Black women. We can just go, let's go on back a few years to the Civil Rights Movement, when people like Ella Baker and Reverend Willie Barrow and other women, and there were no women voices, one woman saying, at the March on Washington, but you know darn well women were planning. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, lots of women were in the planning of the movement overall, carrying the movement. And again, many of these movements are being carried on the backs of Black women. It has always been the case, even where we are in present day. Finally, I think the jubilance that Black women feel at Vice President Harris being elected, being elected in the second highest land in the office is finally being seen. I cannot tell you how many sisters are walking a little lighter, their heads are held up a little higher, because finally our contributions, what we bring, what we have, our blood, sweat, and tears, literally, in this country, they finally feel like those things have been acknowledged in this victory. And so I just wanted to get it, because there are a lot of structural things, and one more thing, I'm sorry, before I switch. We haven't even talked about the healthcare inequities, because right now, and the state of Illinois, shame on us, because we are really, when we are stand out in a poor way when it comes to the rest of our country even. But a Black woman with a college degree is over 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy or childbirth or soon thereafter related to complications. And it is directly linked to the implicit bias that it is in the medical institution, that the state of Illinois passed a law last January, so January of 2020, that went into effect to teach these things, to teach the bias, and to try to solve for the fact, because there's no other reason that's been explicable when you norm for everything else other than this implicit bias that's happening. But it shows up in lots of other places as well.
So if I could, hey, y'all are fire. Thank you.
Look.
Thank you. Now, what I want to pivot to, because we had the chat, the Q&A is on fire as well. So I definitely want to make sure we get to the questions, but I just wanted to carry this through. Felicia, you brought up healthcare, and Sharita, you were talking about the impact of COVID-19 on Black women, jobs, security, their businesses, everything. So I would like to kind of frame it in that, go down that road in terms of the discussion around these healthcare inequities that, people just all of a sudden, Black people are treated differently in it as it relates to their health, when there is also a historical, systemic, we can follow the breadcrumbs. So I would love someone to kind of talk about the impact of healthcare and where we're at for Black women, and how when we center Black women from a health standpoint, from a self-care standpoint, from a, Sharita, you were talking about, on the job, like people not fitting to the employer, but fitting to the employee, and the woman in her unique, what she brings to the table. So I'll offer it up to whoever wants to jump in.
Sharita, you want to go, or you?
I mean, let's just take the most recent battle that we're fighting right here in Chicago, when they really made the decision that they were going to close Mercy Hospital, and leaving us with one hospital to offer prenatal services or maternal services for all the Black women on the south side of Chicago. And that happens nowhere else. And the fact that decision was made void of thought of the impact that it would have on the women in these particular communities goes to show you the lack of value they place on Black women's health. And also goes to show you what happens once again when there's a lack of representation at the table. And so what happened? Advocacy groups had to step in and say, hold up, like, we're dealing with a Black mortality issue for Black babies in this city. We're dealing with the fact that more Black women die in labor than any other group. And you mean to tell me that you think that it's okay to close this hospital, leaving us with one point of access to serve all of these women? So it's just that is just one example of many that kind of shows the lack of thought that goes behind some of the decisions that are made that are driven by economics. I get it, driven by economics. It's all about money. But at some point in time, you have to say, it's this way because of the structural inequities that are embedded in the system. And because of this, we have to bite the bullet and bite the cost so that we can right these wrongs.
Right. I will say that too, because health is a public good. Health
Right.
is a public good. And so you have to make those investments and keep those things available. I mean, and so in the context of, if we already have structural issues, there was a video circulating, and I forget her name, and I should know her name, of a doctor who talked about her journey with COVID.
Mhm.
And it's not, it doesn't stand alone all by itself. The fact that it's already difficult for Black women to be heard, there's the belief that we have higher thresholds of pain. There is the belief that, so we are withheld pain medication. When we talk about our symptoms, we're not heard. And that's not just women of modest mean or women on the lower economic rung. That is women, wealthy women. Beyonce and Serena Williams recently talking about their experiences with healthcare and how they were not being listened to. So when you present with COVID symptoms, are you being listened to? Are you just being sent home? Are you being rushed out saying, oh, you just have fill in the blank, whatever it is? Are you being given the treatments? You know, this was, as it was happening in real time, it required innovation on the part of doctors, and it required them, you know, the therapies that were being given, were they being given equitably in hospitals, in hospital settings and therapeutic settings all across? And also the other complication is that when we look at those who are in nursing home care or those who are in facilities, care facilities, and the number of women, we all know women live, sorry men, if they're men watching, you know, women live longer, it's just one of those things. And so by default, the number of people in a facility, the higher ratio of those people are likely to be women. And in my community, Black women for sure, in our communities, Black women. And are they being provided the same services? And then you add to that the number of women, the overrepresentation. I think Sharita talked about this earlier about work segregation or sector segregation, or the overwhelming number of African American women who are CNAs and LPNs and phlebotomists, and these literally in the healthcare field, these are the women who are directly on the front line. If you were taking blood, if you were taking contaminated blood, there certainly have to be safety protocols. You should be protected. And we've heard stories of people having to protest because they weren't being provided PP, the personal protection equipment, early on. And so you know, those decisions, when the decisions are made, and this goes back to the topic of this discussion, centering Black women. If you center Black women and the experiences of Black women, then the decisions that you make will be different. Then you will make sure that she is provided the PPE. You will make sure that her choices for healthcare do not continue to shrink. You know, the context is really important. Mercy Hospital potentially closing, on top of the fact that Jackson Park Hospital had already closed its labor and delivery, and so on and so on. And so if it's not just your community, it's a community over from you, and then 2 communities over. And what we have here is a huge health equity desert when it comes to Black women. And then you already know the other statistics. So not just about childcare, but about breast cancer rates and survival rates, and ovarian cancer and survival rates, and those types of things as well. And all of this really comes back to the lack of centering and listening to the experiences of and the voices of Black women.
Thank you. So Tammy, what does history tell us as to why it is so hard to center Black women? I mean, y'all done broke it down. It helps all of us to thrive. It helps all of us to be better. So what can history tell us as to, you know, the road that we're going down, that we're trying to, you know, elevate the voices of Black women, elevate the needs of Black women, and how that impacts future generations and folks outside of our community? And really, you know, if we think about it, is this not a biblical tenet when you think about it? Like Mother Teresa, one of her favorite texts from the Bible is, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. That is a tenet that has been around for thousands of years. So Tammy, any historical perspective on that? think she's frozen. So would anybody else kind of want to weigh in there in terms of, you know, just kind of what our past or our history, you talked about the civil rights movement, you know, how that informs how we, you know, move towards centering Black women. Like, why is this so hard?
You know, Christina, earlier this summer, I was jogging. I started, you know, jogging around my neighborhood, and this just sparked this spiral in my head. Somebody had thrown like a diaper out of the car, and it made me think about like how your body is, you know, how you change a baby. If anybody, I'm a mom, and so I've changed a baby on my lap. And it took me to this place where I started to think about all the ways in which a Black woman's body has been used by others for all sorts of things. There is this book, everybody knows this book, probably, The Giving Tree. And it talks about how the little boy takes, you know, all this stuff. He gets the shelter from the tree, you know, is protected from the sun, from the tree, so forth and so on. And then the end, he chops down the tree and burns it. And I said this to a friend once, that Black women are that giving tree. It's that society has literally taken everything from you. Your body was used to propagate this country, to propagate children, so that the landowners could have more slaves, so that they could have more wealth, so that, you know, more crops, more wealth, so forth and so on. Your person was not your own. Your breast milk was used for other people's children. You were denied that privilege even for yourself and for your own children, because it was valued for other people for their convenience, and so forth and so on. And so this historical context of all the ways in which over the course of history, there's been an erasure either of Black women and their story and their pain and our suffering, or there's been, you know, there's been this mammification, like, y'all should do this work, and you shouldn't get paid for it. No, I'm like, pay me what you owe me, okay? Women should be paid, and they should be paid equitably. Black women should be paid equitably for what they do. Not like, oh yeah, I want to use you for a thought partner. Use me for a paid consultant for this work. And so it just continues and continues. Historically, all the ways in which our labor and our voices have been used for movements and for lots of other things, and building the wealth of others. And when we turn and say, you know, give us our due, you know, then, you know, all of a sudden, you know, people, you know, you get pushed and hushed up out the door, or worse, honestly. I mean, there are worse things that have happened to us for demanding our equal pay or demanding our equal rights.
Thank you for weighing in on that. And hopefully Tammy can rejoin us. So I'm going to let some questions come through, but, you know, because there's a lot, but I'm like trying to keep up. So the first question is, when we were talking earlier about Black women being brought in at the C-suite level or executive level to save companies that are in a bad situation, this questioner is asking, do companies bring Black women in after they're in trouble because they need a scapegoat?
So I think it's why they're in trouble, right? Sometimes they bring in, you know, Black women because it's a diversity issue and it looks good, right? Perception, and she does become a scapegoat. I think a lot of times when we get into these leadership roles where we are being challenged to turn something around, especially when we're not given the proper support and lead time, it's so that we can be that scapegoat. It's so that, you know, we can be that person. We've been brought in sometimes to just solely to fire the problem Black women that they're trying to get rid of, right? You know, we've been in that role too. So yes, absolutely, we are brought in sometimes to be scapegoats. Sometimes the intent is well to bring us in because they believe that we do have the power to make the change. We just aren't given the same latitude. We are, I've heard this somewhere else before, and it's like, I'm like, that's genius. We are not given the privilege to be mediocre like everybody else. Mm-hmm. We have to be the best at everything that we do. Meanwhile, other people get to show up average and get paid every single day. And
can be a whole president of the United States with no background.
I'm not trying to go there. I'm just saying.
That's not my experience. I wouldn't necessarily, my experience is not that they're looking for a scapegoat. It's more that they will be allowed to not have any what's the word I'm looking for? Backlash if the Black person fails. It's acceptable to bring me in because other people have failed. Let's give her a try because other people have failed. If I fail, they don't get any backlash. So that's the only someone who might really want to bring in somebody who looks like us and they know is qualified, but they don't have the political wherewithal to do it unless somebody else's fails, and then they can bring you in because, hey, they fail. Let's just try something new. And then if you're successful, they look great and they look like, oh, they're the white knight. Well, we're successful. We brought somebody in. It was a great decision. But if she fails, oh, nobody was able to do it, and they're able to get some political cover. So that's
and I think we just
my experience of
I'm sorry, and I think we just have to be savvy. Like when we're interviewing for these positions, we can't be afraid to ask the hard questions. When you're interviewing, it's not just them interviewing you, you're interviewing them as well. And you have to do your due diligence. You have to find out what's going on in that organization. And then you have to ensure that you're putting things in place in your negotiations, Kimberly's point earlier, that you are covered and that you are protected. And that you know that you have the proper support that you need, that you're going to be given the time that you need, that you have the latitude that you need to make the decisions that you need to make without ruffling feathers or whatever the case may be. But that's on us. Now that part is on us to do our due diligence in that interview process, to understand what we're walking into and making sure that we have the protections.
And I will say every time you interview, they're going to tell you everything that you want to hear, but the key is to bring in your own team. People that you know are going to be loyal to you into that company. If you don't do that, you're at the mercy of how the wind blows. But if you bring in your own support team in those key positions where you can, it makes all the difference in the world of your success.
That's a good point. The next question is, so how do we bridge the gap or start building within the gap on the road to centering Black women? And I'm assuming this is, across the board. So from a healthcare, from an economic standpoint, parity. So that question to anyone.
I think Sharita, you had mentioned earlier, maybe it was you, Felicia, about education, Black women getting degrees and, being, saddled with debt. I think there's definitely some policy changes that can happen, but I also think as a community, we have always looked at the mission of a job versus the economics. What I mean by that, it's great. Oh, she's a teacher. She's a nurse. That's great. But also, that's not always where the income is. So I think we want to balance out that debt we're taking on and what we're trying to achieve. And I think a lot of times in our community, we don't look at that because we're mission-driven people. We want to help others, but we necessarily don't take care of our family because we're so mission-driven. And I think when we talk about education with our kids, we need to talk about everything, about what does this mean, the type of lifestyle you're going to have if you choose this career. And then what, to invest in that career, what's reasonable so you can have the kind of lifestyle that you want. I don't think we necessarily have those conversations with our families.
I think that to add on that, I just also want to make sure that people understand, because I know there's been a lot of conversations around debt and does it really help Black folk? And, is this just listen. So there's the statistic out there that 20 years after enrollment, the typical Black student still owes 95% of their debt compared to 6% for white students.
Wow.
Okay. There is another statistic out there that says that close to, 78% of Black students borrow to go to school as opposed to 58%. So I just want people to understand, like we say education, that is a huge investment, and education is not cheap anymore. Like when I went to state school, it was, $12,000, I think, or something like that. Now we're talking $50,000 a year. So, we have to understand what we're getting into. But in terms of like bridging, how do we get from here to there? We're already on that path, and we just have to keep working the path. We have a moment. This is a moment that we cannot squander. And, people are like, Sharita, you always so fired up. I am. We have to act with urgency. There will be no more perfect time than this to move this needle forward. We have too many people in place and positions of power. And if we don't use this opportunity, and if we don't use these platforms and these spheres of influence, we will squander this opportunity and it may not come around again, not in this way. So we're already on that path and we all just have to act with urgency. We don't have time. We're not waiting. We don't want to wait. We don't want to be patient.
Facts. Black is the new black. So get in where you fit in. Our business has been booming because now people understand the need for multicultural marketing experts, and you need to talk to Black people in a way that respects and relates to them. So absolutely. The next question I have is, how do we begin to ensure people are aware of the resources that are available to them? So you all talked a lot about, Kimberly, you talked about like the side hustle and the road to that, and how that needs to, you know, be in everyone's life to accent their wealth, you know, build up their wealth. How do we ensure that people know about these things?
I'll start. Am I on mute?
No, we hear you.
You know, one of the things, we live in an age. So when I was a little girl, we didn't have computers. We didn't have cell phones. And, you know, I remember when the beeper was the thing before all of this. And so and there was no Google or any other search engine. So in this moment, I mean, we live in a time when you can have access to vast amount of information. And I would suggest we need to do a little less TikTok videoing, right? And a little bit more, I'm serious, a little bit more thinking about economic policy or thinking about community building or whatever the case may be, like topics to help us that will enrich our minds and help and enrich our pockets at some point as well. So it is difficult sometimes to cut through all the clutter, but the clutter that we're trying to cut through is all the kitten videos and this and that and the latest dance. I mean, quite frankly. And so, you know, I'm sound like my mama, you know, picking up a book, looking at who do you aspire to be like? They will tell you what they read. They will tell you what they focus on. You know, more and more people I know don't have televisions and certainly don't have cable and are being really selective about the information that they bring into their minds or into their homes or so forth. And that's all of us, you know, we can say there are a lot of things outside of our control, but we can actually control the information that we go and pull down and the sources that we read to kind of like enrich ourselves. So that's one thing that I will say, and my co-panelists might have other suggestions.
I would say lean on your network, because I know when I started my own business at the time years ago, I was a little nervous because I consider myself of having no network. But then you're surprised about, you know, what makes up a network. Your alumni of a school, you know, it could be a high school, it could be a college, a university, but, you know, they all have, you know, membership groups, you know, based off of interests. There's, you know, book clubs, you know, there's all type of interest groups around certain interests that you could join and start networking and meeting people. And that's basically how I built my business, from basically nothing, just leaning on those networks. And people are generous, you know, to my surprise. If you ask someone, hey, can I meet for coffee and pick your brain? 9 out of 10 times people are going to say yes. And so a lot of times it's just looking at your own, you know, members of your church and just reaching out and for those people to help you on your journey.
Great. The next question, this is a good one. Kamala's success, or Vice President Harris's success, is wonderful. But what about Stacey Abrams and the women who worked alongside with her, Mayor Lance Bottoms and Mayor Muriel Bowser, like in terms of lifting women up? You know, kind of what do we think when we're centering Black women, all Black women, not just certain women?
No, I mean, I don't think we have an argument there. We agree. Stacey Abrams, Stacey Abrams did not do that all by herself in Georgia even. She also had 2 other Black women and another woman of color on that team. And they crisscrossed that state and did everything necessary for the outreach in that state. And so there's that. And I think there's a lesson there about giving credit, right? There is this, you know, I know that I stand on the shoulders of people who come before me. I know that as much as I'm fabulous and you know, I woke up like this. No, I had help. I had people who invested in me. I was a poor girl on the south side of Chicago in Oakdale Gardens. So you're telling me that just on my own, Felicia Davis, because she's so great, did all of that? No, I had people who believed in me. I had people who gave me a shot. I had people who saw, wait, she's kind of smart. You should go into this program. You should go to this school. You should do this, right? And so so we all had help. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And I think that, I mean, me personally, for the generation coming after me, I try to be really transparent about that so that they don't think that all you have to do is put the S. I think what Tammy said earlier about, you know, you just put that S on your chest and you're going to be able to, you know, fight all demons and all the tigers and all the battles. I think Kimberly talked about that, about thinking about the network. You know, I come from a community of people. I come from a community of warriors, from women who have had nothing, who will say, baby, you got a chicken, I got some whatever, we're going to put this together and all our kids going to eat. And so thinking about, and that's, y'all know that's one of the principles of Kwanzaa. We don't celebrate it, the cooperative economics. That's part of what that means, is that we look out for each other and that we can take what we have, put it together and magnify it. Joining collectives that are around giving. You know, I'm a founding member of a Southside Giving Circle. These are women who come together, who give their money to invest in organizations and Black women and serving Black women and girls. But there are also collectives for economics where you come together in investment clubs and so forth. And so, I mean, you can go to brunch, but we also need to be doing these other things that are going to help us achieve.
Love that. Love that. Yes, and the next question is, how do those of us that hold various positions ensure that we are doing our part in African American communities and underserved communities? For example, the low representation of specialists of color accepting Medicaid due to various barriers and low pay set by the government. So that's a very specific question. What more can we be doing?
Felicia just spoke to it. It's, you know, it is really thinking about how do you help align yourself with others that are doing the work to build communities, to add your talent and your treasure. So it's not just about writing a check, but it's also about giving your time and giving your time to those causes that you start. There's so much need that's out there, and there's so many great organizations out there doing great work that it really isn't hard to do just a little research to find a place to connect yourself to, you know, to do a little work. And I think one of the other things that we have to remember is that when we center Black women, it doesn't just need to be Black women doing that. Like, there are plenty of men out there that are working right alongside, that worked alongside Stacey Abrams, that were in, you know, Vice President Harris's camp to get her to where she is. It isn't, if it's just us, we're never going to get there. We have to understand how to allow others to support us, number one, and to, you know, give credit to those that are also supporting us. For me, my father has always been my biggest cheerleader. He's the one that built me up to say, you can be whatever you want to be, right? That it started with me, with my father. And there's so many other men out there that are willing to do the work, that are willing to champion the cause, that are willing to be not just an ally for us, but to say, no, they deserve their just due. And hell, we want them doing the job anyway, because we know that they're going to do it better. Like, they get it. So, you know, allow them the space to do that work too.
Can I add something too?
Please.
We should take some responsibility. And Sharita and I talk about this. So let's y'all be honest. We all have women. So overwhelmingly in this country, care work is being done by women, particularly women of color, and often Black women. And so as a Black woman, who are the other Black women that are part of my tribe that I pay for things? Who does my hair? Okay, I'm going down a list, y'all. So holler when I get to your street. Your eyelashes, your eyebrows, your facials, your fingernails, your blah, 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 right? Childcare, cleaning houses, sometimes cooking food, all of that. And the one thing that we have to ask ourselves, are we paying them equitably? Everybody always want a deal. Everybody always want, but can't you come down on the price a little bit? And you know what that means? You know what that looks like? That looks like that sis not having a retirement. That looks like that sis not having health care. That looks like her not being able to take a day off sick, and she has to do the hair, the nails, or whatever it is sick because she needs that. We have to be honest. I mean, we talk a lot about, I mean, personally and at the foundation, I talk a lot about what government can do, talk a lot about what corporations need to do, but there is a whole sphere where it's us, individuals, who are also contributing then to this underpayment or undervaluing of other Black women if we don't pay them what they're worth, if we don't utilize their services, if we don't buy their clothes, if we don't, I mean, I'm just go on and on and on. You have to, it's a personal pledge that I will pay equitably any woman or any person who is providing any kind of care for me. Because y'all know, in order to do the jobs that we do, you need some help, okay? You need somebody is doing all of that stuff that I just talked about. And we need to be honest about that and not like brag about, oh, you know, I got her down to this price. Well, that sis now has to make a trade-off because, you know, she's going to go without something or her family's going to go without something because it's not sustainable. Childcare needs to look different. The way in which we reimburse for childcare needs to look different. We need to advocate for those things because overwhelmingly the people who are providing those jobs, so let's say like, it doesn't matter to you, it matters to you. All of us, if you've ever been a parent, at some point you have had your child in childcare, someone else has helped to provide for your, and we might have, you know, complained about that extra, what was it? I don't know, when you were late, 5 minutes after 6
$1
o'clock.
a minute, $1 a minute.
You might complain, we might, and I know I did, I feel bad, I apologize if I, you know, that I did it. Because what I realize is I'm keeping her away from her own family. She's given to me and my family all day. And so that $1 a minute after my 6 o'clock, you know, I mean, so we need to be honest about those things. So that's what I'm saying. I'm calling all the sisters in and saying, y'all, we need to have a conversation with ourselves about how we're going to value each other in this in this economy.
Yes, and Felicia, I'm sure the entrepreneurs on here are like, say it again for the people in the back. You don't ask Gucci for a discount. Please come pay my full price. The next question I have, is the moniker Black Girl Magic a blessing or a curse in the framing of this centering Black women?
So I struggle. I love it when we're talking to each other. I often struggle with people identifying Black women as strong and as the super women because it makes us, it dehumanizes us. So it allows people to look at us in a way in which we're not human and that we don't get tired or we don't get ill or we don't feel pain or, you know, we don't get stressed or whatever the case may be, none of which are true.
Right.
And so I believe in the way that we use it amongst ourselves is beautiful, you know, because it's a way for us to highlight, like, I see you, sis. I see you. You are beautiful. You are doing it. Keep doing it. I love it. I got you. When I feel like others use it, it's a stamp of, there she goes again. And it goes back to, I wish Tammy was here right now, right? It goes back to the same perception that we had from the time that they brought us to this country, right? And used our strong backs and our strong hips to birth a nation and to build their communities. And has lived with us in all this time. So I live in a dual world with that. But amongst each other, when I see you, yeah, Black Girl Magic, I got the twinkle and the stars in my eyes.
What's your perspective on that, Kimberly?
I mean, I agree with her. I think as a Black woman, it's hard to be vulnerable
Mhm.
Of this preconceived notion, and then when you are vulnerable, just can't take it anymore. You got to show your true self. It's not received well. It's almost like, how dare you be vulnerable? How dare you? Something must be wrong. Versus if someone like, if I was a white female was vulnerable, it's okay. She needs our support. But when you're vulnerable, it does not look at the same. It's like, oh, you can't do that. You're not capable of doing it. So I definitely agree with what she's saying wholeheartedly.
Great. Next question, when we are trying to be the best, how prevalent does the imposter syndrome become among Black women who are trying to be successful like our white counterparts? So the dreaded imposter syndrome.
I would say
So-
it's just,
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Kimberly.
Your true self has to come out. It's just not sustainable. It's extra stress.
So we have a woman that we work with often at Chicago Foundation for Women. Her name is Jax, Dr. Jax Black. And she teaches a lot about joy and leadership, strengths, coming from a place of strengths. I have one thing that she puts in her presentation about leadership is not about climbing up the corporate ladder. It's about walking into your own soul. And so this idea of imposter syndrome, which is something that I am like a recovering person from because I'm not owning it anymore. She has said, who told us, or who told me, right? What little girl part of me was told that I was insufficient or that I was not enough? Because her position is then we need to go like heal that part of you so you can own your greatness. And that's not being I really try to walk with humility every single day, anyone who knows me. But there is this part where you have to own what you've done. You have to own your accomplishments, own your achievements. And I tell young people this all the time because the things that I have been through, or the things that girls have been through, say from the south side of Chicago or the west side of Chicago, would kill people. They would not survive it. And that is not a deficit. The way society makes you feel like that's a deficit, that is actually a strength, and it is a well of strength. Like, I've been poor, so it won't break me, right? Like these things that have happened to me won't break me. They didn't the first time and they don't now. And so I'm just gonna call out Jax. I don't know if she's listening or she looking, or somebody tell her, because she is like, we need to get over that. We need to go back to that little girl piece of us. We need to heal her. So that we can own our greatness, so that we can walk confidently. Because I'm going to go back to what Sharita said, and I have another friend who says this: mediocre white men, they not. Come on, y'all, they're not like, oh, I'm less than. You're like, hey, who wants to be president of the United States? I do. I mean, like, so.
That is so true. I think even just taking the time for yourself to do that healing, to spend time with yourself to understand and unpack that imposter syndrome. And why is it that when we walk in the room and we're the only one, it's suddenly, well, I have to be, the S on my chest, which is a weight. It is a weight for a lot of us. So thank you for that. Another question, how do we as Black women best support our mayor, our county board president, our Illinois lieutenant governor, our 3 Black women public university presidents, the women like you leading our nonprofits, and the new woman coming to our town as Walgreens CEO, Roz Brewer?
Well, I'm gonna shout out the women in nonprofits real quick. You support us by making donations to our organizations, okay? All of us are judged in part by how effective we are at fundraisers, and that includes Z here at Chicago State University. So I'm not just saying all of us working in that sphere. Part of it is the way you can support Sharita and I is you can support our organizations through donations and volunteering and so forth. And I'm sure Kimberly, as a small business owner, the way you support her is through engaging her services or hiring her for an event or something like that. So I'm just gonna say that part and let my sister speak.
That was great. Thank you. I agree with that. It is about support, but it's also about holding us accountable in a positive way. So it's not, that doesn't mean that you have to co-sign on every decision that we make, on every word. You have to agree with everything that we do. But you can do it where you can call us up, you can send us an email, you can get us a message and say, I support you. I don't agree with this. Or I would like to have a conversation with you about this. Or you said you were going to do X and I haven't seen it happen yet. Do you have plans? Like, where is it? When is it coming? How is it coming? Sometimes it's just a pause or a delay or whatever the case may be. So some of that is about, yes, it's support, it's using our services, it's showing us love, it's supporting us when others are not. So, you know, being our cheerleader out there in social media where people may be trying to drag you. And then it's also about when these doors close and it's us sitting at this table, that you find a way to honestly hold me accountable. Because I can only be better if you are challenging me to be better in love.
And I think that's particularly important for our public officials. I mean, we have to be able to offer loving critique. Some of the, you know, it is very difficult to turn a large organization, you know, these are all large organizations, the city, the county, the state, so forth, right? They've been going on a direction for as long as the city's been incorporated, as long as the county's been incorporated, and so forth. And so it goes back to the premise of when the woman, when the person, the leader in charge is a Black woman, how much grace do we give? But there are also expectations, because in order to get, I mean, so this goes for Vice President Harris. There are a whole bunch of expectations about what that means now that you're in that seat. And then we give grace and time, but also, to Sharita's point, accountability and loving critique.
Well, in the 2 minutes that we have left, I want to ask each of you to give me one word. What does centering Black women feel like? Sharita.
That's a hard one. Acknowledgement.
Alicia.
Love.
Kimberly.
Or
And for me, it's courage. So I want to thank everyone who has joined us this evening. A big thank you to my panelists, Kimberly, Felicia, Sharita. You all were amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation, for your input, for your expertise, and for the work that you all do to center Black women every single day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to invite our audience, if you would like to hear more of these conversations and support Chicago State Foundation, come on, follow us on YouTube, our channel on YouTube at Chicago State Foundation, as well as donate. So please visit www.csu.edu/donate to give us all your coins so we can continue to do this great work, talk about how we advance Black women and continue to center them as well. Have a good night, and thank you so much for giving me the honor of moderating this panel. Bye.